I'm going to tell you about a man nobody bothered to look at twice. And by the end of this story, you will never walk past a cleaner in a hallway again without wondering who they really are. My name is Daniel, and I am 38 years old. And for 3 years, I mopped the floors of a company called Halbrook Aerospace, pushing a yellow cart past glass offices where men in suits never once met my eyes, because to them I was invisible, just a uniform and a bucket. And they had no idea that the hands gripping that mop had once gripped the control yoke of an F-16, that the eyes they never looked into had once read enemy radar signatures at 300 knots, that the quiet man emptying their trash cans had a chest full of medals buried in a shoebox under his son's bed because looking at them hurt too much. And if you believe that kindness matters, that dignity has nothing to do with a paycheck, then stay with me, because what happened on a grey Tuesday morning changed everything. And if you feel something stirring in your chest right now, do me a favor and hit subscribe to Kindness True Stories, because stories like this one deserve to be heard by more people who still believe in second chances. So let me take you back to where it all began. 7 years ago, when I was still Captain Daniel Reyes, call sign Ghostwalk, flying combat missions I still cannot fully speak about, married to a woman named Claire, who used to wait by the window every time I deployed. And we had a son, Ethan, who was barely 2 years old when Claire got sick. And I remember the exact hospital room, the exact shade of white on the walls, when the doctor told me there was nothing more they could do. And I remember holding my wife's hand as she made me promise that whatever happened, I would put Ethan first, always. And 3 weeks after the funeral, I sat in my dress uniform, and I resigned my commission because I could not be a father who was gone 6 months a year, not to a boy who had already lost his mother. So I hung up my wings, and I walked away from a career that had defined me. And for a long time, I told myself that was the end of my story. But a man still has to eat, and a son still needs shoes and school supplies. So I took whatever work I could find, and eventually that meant a mop and a badge that said, Facilities at Halbrook Aerospace, a company that, in a strange twist I never told anyone about, built the very jets I used to fly. And every single day I walked those halls past, pilots and training simulators and executives discussing contracts, and not one of them ever asked my name beyond what was stitched on my shirt, and that was fine. That was the deal I made with myself, because Ethan was 7 now, and every night when I picked him up from his aunt's house, he would run to me with his backpack bouncing and tell me about his day, and that was worth more than any medal I ever earned. That boy was my whole mission now. So if you have ever given up something you loved for someone you loved even more, you already understand exactly how I felt walking those quiet halls. And if that means something to you, please remember to like and share this video, because somewhere out there is another parent who needs to hear that sacrifice is never invisible. It is only unseen for a while, and that Tuesday started like any other. I was cleaning the executive wing when the building's emergency intercom crackled to life. Not the usual fire drill tone, but something sharper, more urgent, and the CEO himself, a man named Richard Halbrook, came storming down the hallway with 3 engineers trailing behind him, all of them pale, all of them talking over each other. And I caught pieces of it, something about a test aircraft, an experimental drone prototype that had lost ground, communication during a live demonstration, flight for a room full of government buyers, and the pilot on the ground control station was frozen, unable to re-establish the correct authentication sequence because the system had reverted to an old military-grade call sign, protocol nobody currently on staff had ever been trained on. And Richard Halbrook was shouting into a radio unit in the hallway, repeating a call sign over and over into dead air. And the moment I heard those specific words leave his mouth, something in my chest went cold and sharp all at once, because that was not just any call sign. That sequence was part of an old joint operations identification system I had used myself 7 years ago in situations I still cannot fully describe. And before I even understood what my body was doing, I set down my mop and I answered him, using the correct verbal response protocol, word for word, without hesitation, and the hallway went absolutely silent. Richard Halbrook turned around slowly, staring at me like I had spoken a foreign language. And one of the younger engineers actually took a step back, and I remember Richard's voice cracking slightly as he asked me how a member of the cleaning staff possibly knew a classified format response sequence that wasn't even in their current systems manual. And for a moment, I almost turned around and picked my mop back up, because old habits of staying invisible run deep. But then I thought of Claire, and I thought of the promise I made her, and I realized that promise was never about hiding. It was about being present, about showing up fully for my son. And there was a boy somewhere who might one day ask me why. I stayed silent when someone needed help. So I looked Richard Halbrook directly in the eyes, and I said, "Sir, I used to fly, and I can walk your ground. Controller, through re-establishing the link right now if you let me." And there was a pause so long I could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. And then he simply said, "Go," and I ran, still in my cleaning uniform, down to the control room, where a young technician sat frozen in front of a blinking console, while a drone worth millions of dollars drifted unresponsive, somewhere over the test range, with a room full of investors watching a dead screen. And I sat down beside him, and my hands remembered things my mind had tried to forget. And I walked him through the manual override sequence, calm, precise, the way I used to talk pilots through emergencies at 30,000 feet. And within 4 minutes the connection re-established, and the drone leveled out and completed its landing sequence perfectly, and the entire control room erupted into stunned applause. And I just sat there breathing hard, aware for the first time in years of how much I had missed the feeling of solving something that mattered. And Richard Halbrook stood in the doorway just staring at me. And later that afternoon, he called me into his office, the same office I used to clean the windows of. And he asked me directly who I really was, and I told him everything. My call sign, my service record, the medals in the shoebox, my wife, my promise, all of it. And he sat there quietly for a long time before he said something I will never forget. He said, "Daniel, you didn't lose your career. You postponed it for the one thing that actually matters." And then he offered me a position as a senior flight systems consultant, working directly with the test pilot program, with a salary that would let me actually save for Ethan's future instead of just surviving month to month. And I remember driving home that evening with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from something closer to relief, like a weight I had carried silently for years had finally been allowed to set itself down. And when I picked up Ethan that night, he asked me why I was smiling so much, and I told him, "Someone finally saw me, buddy." And he just hugged me and said, "I always saw you, Dad, and if that doesn't remind you why kindness and patience and never judging a person by the job they're doing right now actually matters, I don't know what will, because you never know who is standing quietly beside you, who they used to be, what they gave up, and what they are still capable of." So if this story moved you even a little, if you believe that hidden strength deserves to be recognized, then please take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness True Stories, because every single week we bring you real,